it's a long distance where there's anything else around it. Basically, is what I'm saying. I think you know that. And so I'm thinking the Gallup culture there. The Native, what percent of Gallup do you think is Native American and Hispanic American? What percent would you say? A sizable amount, isn't it?
Yeah, I would definitely say more than 50% would be communities of color in Gallup. Of course, the Navajo population definitely fluctuates because it is a border town. So Navajo families don't necessarily live in Gallup. They live on the outskirts or live in the reservation, but they travel to Gallup because that's, again, like you said, it's really the only nearby town that we can get, groceries and get supplies and things like that before we head home.
And it's a big stop on the highway there too for people who are driving across the area. It's has there been and as far as do you think for the Navajo there or the Dene, do you think that has there been job opportunities created here I know that they have a lot of the wind turbines are not too far from there. The huge wind turbine farms that they have there are not far from there. Is there been any job opportunities created for the Navajo, or is there any what other possibilities are for people trying to build a life there for jobs and for a future?
I mean, right now there's definitely a big push for development, especially in businesses and small businesses here on the reservation, that definitely lend its hand toward creating jobs for people. But it is still very, it's very low percentage of people who are actually employed. I mean, in places like border towns, yes, definitely they do offer job opportunities for Navajo people. But unfortunately, because it is a border town, it also carries with it the weight of racism and the weight of sort of homophobia. So it's definitely sort of a good and bad thing that our people are finding jobs in border towns, but they're also very vulnerable also in border towns.
Yes, and I know you mentioned in the poetry too about and I deal with this too. I'm just going to insert this because I can show you I understand. I have mentored many people and helped them build their lives over a number of years, and because I had such a blessed life myself, and I'm grateful that I can do it and give back. And I'm involved in a lot of social justice causes. So the point I'm getting across here is you mentioned in the poetry too the alcoholism that is certainly a factor on many of the Navajo, and not only that, the other tribal lands as well. What is your thoughts on that, and what can be done to try to lessen the amount of alcoholism there is? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, maybe not even, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very large issue that my family, that families, our relatives and friends have dealt with. It's a common issue here on the Navajo Nation. And of course, what I definitely think in terms of addressing it is just sort of community projects and community movements and tackling it from all sort of sides. And so that's what I'm hoping this book also lends a hand, that, helps families here back home start discussions about uncles, about brothers, about cousins, in relation to masculinity, in relation to sexuality, in relation to intimacy, because those definitely could be contributing factors to causing folks to sort of go down that road of alcoholism and addiction. So I mean, that's at least what I see, is all these different people attacking the issue from all different angles.
Excellent. And I know you had several mentions of this in your poetry here too, in the book, which is excellent. What would you, if you were picking out of all the different poems in his stuff you had in here, the different areas, I'm looking through it now, do you have any particular ones that were your favorites in there, or that you want to tell a little bit about more in detail? I know some of them here, they were a little bit, well, I could tell where they stopped and started, but then on some of them here, Yeah, I said I kept waiting. I said, oh, there must be more, but then that was the end of it. So, but can you give any thoughts on that? Like which ones were some of your favorites in there? Which ones that you can tell some points on that you were trying to get across in the poetry? So you can just give our listeners a little bit of taste of what they could find in the book.
Yeah, there's a series of poems titled "In the Fields." And that phrase, "in the fields," becomes a refrain, so a repeated sort of phrase throughout the entire collection. But specifically, there are 4 poems titled "in the fields" that sort of meant to be this sort of, if the reader were, hiking or something, hiking through the collection, they'd open up into this field where it's both a resting point, but also a point where we're able to offer some reflection. And so 2 of them deal with sort of the violence or the beauty, the brutality of Gallup, but then the other 2 In the Fields poems deal with the beauty of Gallup, especially through the body and through intimacy and what that looks like. Those are my favorite because for me, I felt that those were markers for both me as a poet, but also markers for the reader to sort of map out.
Excellent. The one that you put in there about the El Rancho Hotel in there, what was your thoughts behind that? That was kind of interesting, telling all the famous people that had stayed there and everything. And that's what I said. I got so fascinated. Well, is this real? And I guess it was real.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, it's something that I've heard, my entire life, was how many celebrities have gone through Gallup and continue to still go through Gallup because, like you mentioned, Gallup is also just right off the interstate. And so generally we will always have sightings of these large celebrities coming through Gallup. And it's such an interesting phenomenon because it sort of spreads like wildfire through Facebook and social media that, someone had visited Gallup. And the hotel there is sort of central. It's an essential part of the town. And so I wanted to give the reader an idea of the type of story and history that Gallup has in relation to pop culture. And so that that poem was placed there just to give the reader a little glimpse, saying, hey, there's another level to Gallup here.
Right. And the one of them I remember here too. There was the part where the tractor tire ran over the skull. And was that real, or is that something to just put in there to make the poem flow? I'm not sure. So in terms of the tractor tire image there that happens in the very beginning, all of those particular images I sort of was able to sort of borrow from the headlines of newspapers. Because, again, I did research. I read newspaper headlines. For the most part, it was definitely a different journey to go through and actually read the descriptions or read the entire articles through and through, because, some of them definitely hit home a little too much and definitely a little harder to read. But the headlines, of course, I could quickly go through and sort of read through all the different headlines of people who fell victim to Gallup, and that was one of the headlines. And so I just didn't want to include the whole story, only because, again, I didn't want to be seen as, taking advantage of the family or the victims. Yeah, so it's just sort of just the headline of it. Okay, Jake, we're almost out of time here. We've got about a minute or so, or a minute and a half here to wrap up. Tell me, summarize for me, and if you can here in a few words, what you would like the readers to take away from this. And I think you've already done this partly. Maybe just go back and restate that again, because it is definitely an excellent read in poetry. Again, I'll say I'm not a big person on poetry, but I was fascinated when I was reading your poetry here and how it's described so vividly. What life must have been like there in the Gallup area and the different scenes you brought together and everything.
Yeah. So I think the key takeaway for me, at least what I hope for the reader, is that they take away the beauty and brutality of masculinity and the beauty and brutality of the land and how they're all connected to each other.
Excellent. Well, Gallup is a unique place. It has a lot of things going for it there. Again, it's a big stop there off the interstate. There's a lot of tourists that pass through there all the time, and it has a long, long history, just like Santa Fe does too. And I was used to just to flying into Albuquerque or driving from Texas over to Santa Fe. And when we were building our resort there, and I didn't get to see a lot of the other parts of New Mexico like that. I mean, so your poetry certainly brings a lot to offer. And I want to thank you so much for being one of our guests today here. And I also want to encourage people to meet you at the Miami Book Fair, where you'll be appearing, and with your excellent book there. And I'm assuming you're going to be signing books, won't you?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, well, listen, I'm going to wrap up here. And again, thank you so very much.
Well, thank you.
Okay, this has been Steve Ryan with Coastal Progressive and Rainbow Forum, bringing you subjects of interest. And we hope you will be tuning in to listen to our other programs as well. Thank you.